Step into a heartwarming tale of childhood, imagination, and the quiet heroism of a little girl with a big spirit. In Little Miss Weezy by Penn Shirley, we meet a charming young heroine whose gentle heart and boundless curiosity draw us into her world of simple joys and quiet triumphs, set against the backdrop of a loving home and an ever-watchful eye on the world beyond. Weezy's story is one of kindness, resilience, and the everyday magic found in the small things. Join us as we journey through the innocent and delightful adventures of Little Miss Weezy. Chapter 1. Teasing Pokey. "I's Weezy Wozy and I's plum 2 old," said little Louise Rowe on her 2nd birthday, and from that time forth everybody called her Weezy, though it wasn't her real name any more than it is yours. There were 2 other little Rows in the family, Kirk, 6 years old, and Molly, 8. Their father lived in a pretty Queen Anne cottage at the end of the street, and the Wymans just around the corner. Mrs. Wyman was Aunt Clara, Mr. Rowe's sister. Having no children of their own, Dr. and Mrs. Wyman were fond of borrowing their youngest niece, and this birthday morning the doctor's voice was heard calling from Mr. Rowe's gate. "Has anybody here a little girl to lend? A little girl 2 years old. Here I is, Uncle Docker." "I's too old," cried little Miss Weezy, toddling through the hall. "Possible? Then you must be the very young lady I'm looking for. Get your bonnet, Snowy Locks." Mrs. Rowe brought the dainty white Normandy cap and tied it under Weezy's chin. "You must be Uncle Docker's darling," said she, lifting her into the carriage. Weezy bobbed her head till the cap frill quivered like a spray of cherry blossoms in a wind, and away she was whirled to her uncle's door. Aunt Clara came out, with her bonnet on, to ask Dr. Wyman to drive down to the dressmaker's. "And if you'll be a good girl, Weezy, and stay with Pokey, we'll bring you home an orange," said she. "A dreet bid, orange?" asked Weezy, always sharp on a bargain. "Yes, dear, a great big orange, the biggest in the store." "Oh, ho, I'd likes oranges," remarked Weezy, prancing away to find the coloured girl, whose long name was Pocahontas. Pokey was washing. After giving Weezy the clothespins to play with, she hastened back to her tub on the other side of the kitchen. Suddenly 2 little white arms splashed into the soapsuds beside her own black ones. "Pokey tired. Weezy it heap," said the little guest, who had climbed a chair unnoticed. "Show, Miss Weezy." "Pat, help you are for sure," cried Pokey, wringing her out and standing her upon the table, while she herself put a basketful of clothes into the boiler on the range. Then, believing the child safely penned, she brought her a cookie and ran out to hang the clothesline. Unfortunately, Pokey had failed to notice that one end of the wash-bench was near the table. Left to herself, Weezy speedily dropped down upon the bench, and from that to the floor, and thus it came to pass that she ran and slammed the door behind Pocahontas almost as soon as the girl had crossed the threshold. "Pokey and Tant tum in," crowed Weezy, turning the key in the lock. "Please, let Pokey in." "Oh, Weezy must let poor Pokey in," shrieked the startled maid, running back to the porch and shaking the door. "No, no." "Pokey tan't tum in," repeated the little tease, delighted to make a sensation. Pocahontas could hear the soapsuds bubbling in the wash-boiler, and she knew it might at any moment overflow and scald the child. But what was to be done? Half wild, she ran from window to window, and found every one of them bolted. The front door, too, was fastened, and the key was in Dr. Wyman's pocket. A sharp clattering in the kitchen drew trembling Pokey to the window in the rear. Oh, little Miss Weezy'll kill herself, and the doctor'll blame me," groaned she, looking in as Weezy thrust the poker into the range. "I's making fire," shouted the child proudly, while in the boiler above the water foamed and seethed. "Weezy'll burn! Weezy'll burn! Oh, please come!" cried Pocahontas with chattering teeth. Weezy laughed roguishly and rattled the poker. "Quick! Oh, quick!" sobbed Pokey, almost beside herself, as she saw streams of water beginning to course down the sides of the boiler. Weezy looked up, and the tears in Pokey's eyes melted the child's perverse little heart. "Poor Pokey and Saul, come in," said she, skipping across to the window. Her flight was none too soon, for the soapsuds that moment boiled over, flooding the range and everything within reach. Even far away as she was, Weezy's pretty Gretchen dress was spattered from neck to hem. Little did Aunt Clara think of that, as she sprang into the kitchen and caught up her mischievous pet, crying, "Thank heaven my darling is safe." What was Pokey thinking of, to leave you alone? Pokey outdoors. Weezy, shut Pokey out, said the little rogue demurely. You shut Pokey out, exclaimed astonished Aunt Clara, kissing the wee meddling hands, still black from the poker. Well, well, who ever heard the like? And it was Mrs. Wyman who let poor Pokey in, as Weezy could not turn back the key. Chapter 2. Going to Church. Weezy was fast learning to talk, and her brother and sister delighted in teaching her long and difficult words, such as Mexico and Constantinople. Molly was a motherly little girl, always worrying over the shortcomings of Weezy and her young brother. It is true that Kirk was often led astray by a rough little playmate, Jimmy Maguire, and Weezy was perhaps instructed in mischief by a 3-year-old neighbour, Kirsty Nye. Still, it might have been as well if Molly had found less fault with the little ones, and thought more of correcting her own sad failing, a quick and troublesome temper. One evening the 3 children were swinging together in the hammock in their front yard, watching for Grandpa Rowe. "Now sing Little Sally Walker, darling, please do," said Molly, playing with her little sister's flaxen curls. Weezy had already hummed Bring Back My Bonnie to Me and various other tunes, and was tired. "Tan't sing, sing's all gone." "Lute," said she, opening her mouth very wide, to show how empty it was of music. "Grandpa's most here," shouted Kirk, leaping from the hammock and running to meet an old gentleman walking up the street. Yes, it was Grandpa Rowe, a dear white-haired minister, with kind blue eyes, and a face as smooth and pink as a baby's. And the satchel he carried held a written sermon, for he was going to stay over Sunday and preach for the village pastor, Mr. Cutler. "It isn't every little girl that has such a good grandpa, Weezy, I can tell you," said Molly wisely, as they hastened after Kirk. "Why, if you should be naughty, it would make him want to cry." The remark seemed to amuse Weezy very much, and when the good man took her in his arms to kiss her, she shouted gleefully, "Gamper goin' to gay! What a queer old Gamper!" Molly was so mortified that she ran into the house, and kept out of the way till tea-time. Grandpa's visits were always a delight, and it was considered a great treat to hear him preach. The next morning Mr. and Mrs. Rowe both wanted to go to church, but with Lavisa Bran, the housemaid, away, what could be done with Weezy? "Can't Molly stay with her?" suggested Mr. Rowe, closing the dining-room door for fear of being overheard. "Of course she might do it, with neighbours so near, but she has been depending upon going to church with her grandfather." "Yes, I know. She thinks it a high honour to have a minister in the family. I overheard her boasting last night that she was the only girl in her class who had a grandfather that could preach. I would stay at home myself if it was respectful to father," said Mrs. Rowe thoughtfully. When she went upstairs by and by, she found Molly trying on the pretty fall hat that she had not yet worn. It was a white felt, trimmed with blue velvet and blue and white ostrich plumes, and suited well her fair complexion and rich auburn hair. "It is lovely, dear, and I know it will be a sad disappointment to you if you can't wear it today," said Mrs. Rowe, coming up behind her daughter at the glass. "Not wear it? It doesn't rain. Why can't I wear it?" cried Molly in great excitement. Mrs. Rowe hesitated. It was certainly her own place rather than Molly's to attend church today, but she found it hard to crush her little daughter's pleasant anticipations. "You forget, Molly, that Lavisa is away and somebody must look out for little sister," said she gently. "Aren't you willing to be the one?" "No, I'm not, Mamma, I'm not willing. I think it's too horrid, hateful, mean. I never can go anywhere or do anything I want to, just because of that little tagging fuss budget," cried Molly, tearing off the cherished hat and flinging it on the bed in a towering passion. "That will do," sighed Mamma, walking away. "And you need not stay at home, Molly. I should be sorry to trust our little Weezy to the care of a girl who does not control herself." "Anything wrong, Mary?" asked Mr. Rowe, meeting his wife in the hall. "Only Molly's temper again," said she wearily. "She feels so abused at being asked to stay at home with Weezy that I think it wisest not to urge the point, but to leave her to herself and let her find out how naughty she is." Poor Molly, that quick temper of hers is always getting her into trouble, but she is sure to repent bitterly," said Mr. Rowe as he followed his wife downstairs. "Do you know what's in my mind?" said Mrs. Rowe, pausing on the landing, with an air of being about to say something startling. "I'm half inclined to take Weezy to church." Mr. Rowe whistled. "There must be a first time," went on Mrs. Rowe, "and she might behave very well. I'm willing to risk her if you are," said Mr. Rowe, on reflection, "and I know it would gratify Father to see the whole family in the pew." "Weezy's going to church, oh goody!" cried Kirk, clapping his hands at the news, whereupon Weezy clapped hers also, though she had no more idea what going to church meant than a baby heathen. She was highly pleased to be going anywhere in her cardinal velvet bonnet and cloak, and ready to make any number of promises to be good, when, at the ringing of the church bell, Molly stole downstairs with red eyes and downcast lids. Weezy ran to take her hand, and the three children walked together up the street, the little sister hopping along in the middle, as radiant as a young flamingo. Mr. and Mrs. Rowe in front of them, with Grandpa, turned every now and then to smile upon the happy baby. "I hope she won't disgrace us today," remarked Papa, "but I must confess I feel somewhat as though we were taking a menagerie to church." "A menagerie that has good intentions, yes, so do I," laughed Mamma nervously, pausing to help Weezy up the steps. The child's ruff was askew, and while it was being straightened and secured with a pin, Grandpa went on up the broad aisle and mounted the stairs to the pulpit. Weezy did not see him go, but the moment she was seated in the pew with the rest of the family, she missed him, and began to stare about her in every direction. Unfortunately, she was so short, and the pulpit was so tall, that she could not get so much as a glimpse of her grandpa's head behind it. "Poor Gamper's lost his safe," thought she, distressed for a moment, but she could not grieve long, where everything around her was so grand and so strange. It was early yet, and she amused herself for some time in watching the coloured light that streamed in through the stained east window. One red ray adorned the crown of Miss Blount's bonnet in the seat in front, another ray of green rested, like a plaster, on Deacon Crosby's nose. Weezy wanted to laugh, but she didn't laugh, for she meant to be Mamma's goody girl. All this time people were moving along the aisles and galleries to their pews. Weezy thought these galleries very queer. "What for do they have such high-up pizzazz, Mamma?" whispered she. "Hush, dear," said Mamma anxiously. "Folks mustn't talk in church." Weezy puckered up her lips like the rim of a wilted morning glory, and sat as prim as a little nun till the organ sounded the first notes of the voluntary. "Fwind blows," whispered she. Then, as the grand music pealed forth, she fairly quivered with delight, and sprang up to lean over the back of the pew, her brown eyes sparkling and her cheeks aglow. Mr. Rowe looked at her proudly, wondering if there was ever a more bewitching child. "Dear Papa!" His look of pride soon changed to one of dismay, for as the music ceased and Weezy turned, she saw her grandfather rising in the pulpit, and gave a little squeal of joy. "I see Gamper!" cried she, in her ringing, childish voice. "Look, Papa, there's Gamper, on the mantelpiece." It was rather droll to think of a grown-up minister tucked away on a mantelpiece, and several people smiled, but Grandpa Rowe read the hymn as solemnly as though he had not heard a word. Papa shook his head at Weezy. Mamma put her finger on the child's lip, and Molly looked ready to cry, but merry little Kirk could not keep from laughing. He laughed till he had to stuff his handkerchief into his mouth, and of course the more he laughed, the harder it was to control Weezy. The congregation now arose for the opening hymn, and the moment Weezy heard her papa's voice, she thought she ought surely to sing too, so with the best will in the world she struck up Little Sally Walker, clear and high, dear well-meaning baby. She had always before been called a goody girl for singing, and why didn't Mamma like it now? What made Mamma drag her out of church in such a hurry? It was so queer. Wretched Molly, left alone at the head of the pew, cowered over her hymn-book, shrinking from the eyes of the congregation. "Oh, Mamma, Mamma, don't you see how I felt?" sobbed she an hour later in her mother's room, whither she had rushed from church to beg pardon for her angry words in the morning. "I know everybody was thinking, there sits that selfish Molly Rowe. Why didn't she stay at home with her little sister? instead of letting her come to disturb the meeting. "Hush, dear. I don't imagine they thought any such thing," said her mother soothingly. "You were not to blame for Weezy's actions. But oh, Mamma, you know you wouldn't have taken her to church if I hadn't been such a naughty, horrid girl. Sometimes, Mamma, I can't help being mad to think I'm so wicked." Chapter 3. The Pumpkin Hood. There was a great bustle next morning at the Queen Anne cottage. Right after breakfast, Grandpa Rowe went away on the train. Next, Louisa appeared in the Braxton stage. And lastly, the older children had to be helped off to school, for the fall term began that day. "I tell you, Mrs. Rowe, it does seem good to see live children again," said Louisa, standing in the doorway, with Weezy clinging to her gown. Kirk was frisking down the path on his toes, but stout little Molly walked with great dignity, in order not to spill the small phial of soapsuds strapped between her books. It was the fashion among the girls to carry soapsuds to school for washing their slates, and Molly had stained hers a lovely scarlet by soaking in it a scrap of red flannel. "Turk go to cool, Molly go to cool, Weezy must go to cool," wailed the little sister, in a spasm of lonesomeness. "Tut, tut! Weezy wants to see what I have brought her in my bag. That's what Weezy wants," said Louisa, taking the child upstairs to give her a great scalloped seed cake. "Funny old cookie all iggly K," cried Weezy, sitting down upon the broad window-seat to eat it. Pretty soon she spied a big pumpkin hood bobbing along under the window. A hood could not travel about of itself, she knew that, and she pattered down to see what was beneath it. "Her's here, old girl, Mamma, got you kinkusen, on," cried she, capering into the sitting-room. "Ask Louisa to give her something to eat," said Mamma, who had seen the beggar-maid pass. Weezy went skipping back. A few minutes later, Mrs. Rowe found her perched on the kitchen table, looking on with great round eyes, while the young stranger munched a slice of bread and butter. In all her little life, Weezy had never before seen so droll a figure. No wonder she called the child's head covering a pincushion. It certainly did not look like a hood. It was made of rusty black cloth, and stuffed with cotton, which was bursting through in 20 places. "It'll dirls des all waggety," chirped Weezy, pointing to the rents in the child's gown. "What is your name, my child?" asked Mrs. Rowe kindly. "Ellen Nolan," answered the little vagrant, and she went on to say that her father was dead, and her mother had taken the sickness. "Where do you live?" continued Mrs. Rowe. "Big tenement t'other end of Spruce Street," said Ellen, with her mouth full. "Spruce Street. Funny to say, on Spruce Street," put in Weezy, listening with great interest. "I'll find something for your mother," said Mrs. Rowe, taking the child's basket into the pantry. Next moment Weezy frisked after her. "Her hasn't a no placings, Mamma. Can't her have Weezy's wabbit? If my little daughter gives away her rabbit, I'm afraid she will cry for it by and by," said Mrs. Rowe, opening the cake chest. "No, no, Weezy won't he?" "Well, well, run and get the rabbit, dear," said her mamma, and Weezy brought the neglected animal, that had been lying under the piano on its cotton flannel back. "Now, and use." "Got a placing?" said she benevolently, crowding it into Ellen Nolan's basket, between a biscuit and a doughnut. Then, attracted by some musicians in the street, she scampered back to the sitting-room to join in the tunes. "Oh, Mamma!" cried she, hopping up and down in ecstasy. "Hear the banders blowin' music, and Weezy singin' what they blows." Having watched the players out of sight, she ran into the kitchen to entertain her guest, but the funny little beggar-maid had disappeared, basket, placing, and all. "Her's tooken away Weezy's wabbit," sobbed the resentful baby, slipping through the door left ajar by Ellen. "Her's a nuggly, naughty, a sing." In 3 seconds more she was out of the yard. Him was Weezy's wabbit. "Ittle dirl mustn't keep Weezy's wabbit at Alice," grumbled she, stubbing her indignant toes over the pavement. Meanwhile Mrs. Rowe had been hastening to wind the spools in her work-basket before her little daughter should return to tangle the threads. Presently she was struck by the unusual stillness of the house, and went to see what the child was doing. "I took it for granted she was with you," said Louisa, appearing from the basement, where she had been at work ever since Ellen Nolan left. Isn't she upstairs? No, I've looked everywhere, and the porch door is open. I'm afraid she has run away. I'll cut across to Cedar Street, said Lovisa, running out bareheaded. Seizing her bonnet, Mrs. Rowe hurried over to Mrs. Nye's, in the hope that Weezy might be with Kisty, but none of the family had seen her that day. More and more alarmed, Mrs. Rowe hastened on down the street. Passing a group of labourers digging by the roadside, she remembered with a shudder that new water pipes were being laid throughout the city. What if her baby had fallen into one of the deep trenches opened for these? Entering the nearest drugstore, she telephoned to her husband that Weezy was missing, and then, at a loss what further to do, ran home again to learn the result of Lovisa's search. All this time Weezy was enjoying the world. April child that she was, she soon forgot her tears, and catching sight of a small white dog, with long silky hair hanging over its eyes, she trudged along behind him, talking to herself. "You's a queer doggy, ought to be. Shame," said she, hair all snarled up. Following the dog into Main Street, she stared with happy wonder at the gay shops on either side. A gaudy barber's pole especially pleased her. "You's got pretty scarf," said she, hugging it, and trying to pick off the painted stripes. "My stars alive, what little creature is this?" exclaimed a policeman, spying her. "I's papa's ittle fidget," said she promptly, pleased with his uniform. "And where does your father live?" "Way, way off." Yes, but what street does he live on, little girl?" "Spruce Street," answered Weezy, suddenly remembering the funny name Ellen Nolan had spoken. "Spruce Street? You don't mean to say you've walked bareheaded all the way from Spruce Street?" asked the puzzled policeman. "Why, it's more'n a mile. Weezy don't want to be talking all the time," cried she pettishly. "'Tisn't plight, that's what my mamma says." "Think a minute, little miss. Don't you live on Pine Street? Weezy says her live's on Spruce Street," cried the little witch impatiently. "Oh, so your name's Weezy. What's the rest of it?" "I's Weezy Wozy," said she, playing with a nutshell in the gutter. "Woolsey, she means, I guess," mused the man. "I'll take her to Mr. Woolsey's on Spruce Street. He has children." Stepping upon a horse-car that moment passing, he soon reached the house with Weezy in his arms. "Here's where your father lives," said he, ringing the bell. "No, Sim, don't," cried Weezy, nibbling a peppermint drop given her by the policeman. That instant she caught a glimpse of Ellen Nolan plodding homeward with her heavy basket. "Her's got Weezy's a wabbit," cried she, springing down and running toward her, while the policeman followed with long strides. "Do you know where this child lives, my girl?" asked he, laying his hand on Ellen's shoulder. "If you'll show me the way to her house, I'll give you a dime." "Yes, I'll show you soon's I've left my basket," said she, rushing in at a neighbouring door and coming out empty-handed. "You's got a plaising, hasn't you?" prattled Weezy, as she walked along with the policeman and Ellen. "Weezy don't want wabbit now. Weezy's got tepnits." And when, a few moments later, her mother clasped her to her heart with tears of joy, Weezy said, "Poor Mama. Pepnits make Mama feel besser," and that was all the little gypsy realized about the anxiety she had caused. Then Papa and Lovisa hurried in, followed by Kirk and Molly fresh from school, and Ellen Nolan afterwards told her mother that she never saw the like of the fuss made over that baby. As to Ellen herself, she went home the proudest girl on Spruce Street, for Mrs. Rowe had given her a neat gingham dress of Molly's, and a brown straw hat with a stick-up feather, fire red. Chapter 4. Weezy's Pickle. "If Weezy is going to be in the habit of running away, I think we'd better let people know where she belongs," said Mr. Rowe. One morning, after the child had been brought back by the policeman, accordingly he went to his writing desk and printed on a correspondence card, in big black letters, "Mr. Edwin H. Rowe, No. 6 Oak Street." He pinned the card to the back of Weezy's dress, right between the shoulders, and after that, as long as the warm weather lasted, it was pinned there every day. Weezy was rather proud of the badge. Kirk called it Weezy's guideboard. She did not run away again that fall, for no better reason, it is to be feared, than that she could not turn the new button that her papa had put on the gate. When it grew too cold to play in the yard, she became so restless and mischievous that even Lavisa lost patience. "I've always said I like to liven children, Mrs. Rowe," cried she, bursting into the sitting-room one day, half scolding, half laughing. "But when it comes to their crawling into my flour barrel, they're too lively for me. I isn't a lively little dirl, Mama. I wanted to be white. Little dirl, just like Cupid," sneezed Weezy, capering behind Lavisa, powdered with flour to her waist. "Oh, Weezy, Weezy," cried Mamma, trying not to smile at the white little image, which certainly did resemble the marble Cupid in the library. She did not feel in the least like smiling when it came to brushing the flour from the child's hair. Neither did Weezy, for the process was long and tedious, hardly finished by dinner time. "The little rogue will wear you all out, Mary," said Mr. Rowe, after laughing heartily over Weezy's prank. "You really need a nurse girl. If we could find some child to amuse Weezy while Molly and Kirk are at school, it would be a great relief," said Mrs. Rowe. "I have been wondering whether it would do to trust Ellen Nolan." "Ah, I understand," returned Mr. Rowe playfully. "You want to help yourself a little by helping Ellen a great deal. That is just your way. Well, why not take Ellen a week on trial?" "Would you?" asked Mrs. Rowe. "Perhaps I'd better." Ellen came the very next Monday, and proved so useful about amusing Weezy that Mrs. Rowe was glad to have her come every day during the winter, to remain from 8 o'clock until 4. She was still with the Rows when the 1st of March arrived, bringing the Reverend Mr. Cutler's birthday. "We have invited Mr. Cutler to dine with us today, Ellen," Mrs. Rowe said to her that morning, "and I want the dining-room kept tidy. You and Weezy can play in the sitting-room, but remember, you must not go into the dining-room." "No'm," replied Ellen rather crossly. "If the minister is coming, they'll have out the new pink china dishes, and them pretty silver spoons with gold inside of 'em," she was thinking to herself. "And I say it's real mean of Mrs. Rowe not to let me go in and see the table as soot." Of course this was wrong, besides being silly, but Ellen dearly loved fine things, and she had handled so very, very few of them. As she built block houses for Weezy, it drove her nearly wild to hear the rattling of the dinner service, and by, when she knew Lavisa had gone into the kitchen to see about the pudding, she opened the dining-room door, the least crack, you know, and peeped in. Weezy always did what Ellen did, so she peeped too. "Weezy mustn't go in," said Ellen, with a longing look at the silver fruit stand on the sideboard. "Yes, yes, her must," cried little Weezy, who had not thought of going in till Ellen spoke, as the crafty nurse girl very well knew. "Her must go," repeated Weezy, stamping her foot. "Well then, hush. Don't make a tinty-tonty speck of noise," whispered Ellen, throwing the door wide open. "Her mother doesn't want her to cry, and get her eyes and nose all red when there's company coming now, does she?" reasoned Ellen. "If Mrs. Rowe should happen to catch us in here, I could say I couldn't make Miss Weezy stay in the sitting-room best I could do. But dear me, Ellen didn't have a bit of a good time after she crossed that forbidden threshold, while she stopped to examine the little silver owl that was really a pepper-box. Weezy tipped over the silver cat that sprinkled salt through its head, and she had hardly brushed the tablecloth clean before Weezy was in the closet, dipping her fingers into the pickle jar. Worse than that, in the second of time it took to replace the cover of the jar, Weezy seized the best silver teapot and ran away with it. "Oh, give it back to me, Weezy, do give it back to me," begged Ellen, following in great distress. She dared not snatch the teapot, lest it might be injured. Besides, Weezy would scream, and that would bring her mamma, who was up in her room dressing for dinner. Weezy turned her back upon Ellen and played with the nose of the teapot. "I's making tea," said she roguishly. "Nice tea for Papa." "Weezy Rowe, you horrid, provoking little wretch," muttered Ellen at her wit's end. "Hark!" Mrs. Rowe was leaving her chamber. She would come right down and find them in the dining-room, and she would know Weezy couldn't have turned the doorknob herself. Oh! Such a state of mind as Ellen was in at that moment! It is impossible to say what she would have done if Mr. Cutler had not just then walked up the path and attracted Weezy's attention. The little rogue dropped the teapot in a hurry and darted to the long window that opened on the front piazza, exclaiming, "The goody man has come. I must go see the goody man." Ellen whisked the teapot into the closet and Weezy out of the window before Mr. Cutler had mounted the steps, and she had closed the window and opened the front door in the time that he was saying, "Well, and how does little Miss Weezy do?" And she was demurely taking the minister's hat when Mrs. Rowe descended the stairs. "There, didn't I get out of that fix well?" mused Ellen, hurrying Weezy back to her blocks. "Nobody in the house will know that I didn't mind Mrs. Rowe." Sly, foolish Ellen! Before dinner was over, everybody in the house, from grave Mr. Cutler to frolicsome little Kirk, knew all about it. It was the teapot that told. The pudding had been served, and Mrs. Rowe had asked Mr. Cutler whether he preferred tea or coffee. "I'll take a cup of tea, if you please," he replied, and then he went on talking to Molly about her school. Mrs. Rowe tipped the teapot, but no tea came out of the spout. "What can this mean?" thought she. There certainly must be tea enough, or the teapot would not be so heavy. She kept tipping it more and more. Suddenly a dark object flew out, followed by a deluge of tea. The object was about as large as Kirk's little finger. It flew right into the minister's plate, and there it lay, a wee cucumber pickle. Mrs. Rowe was too mortified to speak, but Weezy clapped her hands, crying, "See Weezy's stopper. Weezy, put it in, all nice." "I suppose the funny stopper must be a present to me," laughed the minister, while shamefaced little Ellen brought him a clean plate, and Louisa took away the soiled tray-cloth. The teapot was in order at breakfast time, and how Weezy has found a chance to meddle with it is a mystery, said Mrs. Rowe, trying to laugh. "She couldn't have done it since Ellen came at 9 o'clock, for I charged Ellen not to let her go into the dining room." Mr. Cutler did not say a word. He purposely fixed his eyes on Louisa, just then bringing in fresh tea in an earthen teapot. But Ellen knew that he knew of her disobedience, and she was so ashamed that she began to cry, and after that everybody understood the story of the teapot. Chapter 5. Dickory, Dickory, Dock. A few days after the dinner party, Ellen Nolan went home, ill with the mumps. This left Weezy without a playmate, and with so much spare time on her hands that she immediately began to turn her attention to housework. It was all very well so long as she contented herself with rolling out cookies on her little cake board and cutting them with a thimble, but when she aspired to be chief cook, it was hard for herself and hard for Louisa. First she salts the hot apple sauce, and next she burns her fingers stirring the salt in, cried Louisa one morning, carrying her, wailing, into the sitting-room. "She's a dreadful capable child." "Yes, Louisa, I agree with you. She's capable of most anything," said Mr. Rowe gaily, as he tossed Weezy up to the ceiling. His little daughter's exploits usually amused him, and he wondered that they should annoy Mrs. Rowe and Louisa. But at noon, on coming home and finding that Weezy had learned how to unlock his writing desk, he was not at all amused. "This'll never do, Mary," said he to his wife. "I can't have her meddling with my papers. She'll be damaging them." "What? Can Weezy open the desk?" said Mrs. Rowe, who had been busy upstairs. "We must teach her not to touch it." "It will be a difficult lesson for her," said Mr. Rowe, locking the desk. "I believe it will be easier, as well as safer, to put the key where she can't get it." "If such a place is to be found," said Mrs. Rowe, smiling. "I flatter myself that such a place is to be found, and, moreover, I flatter myself that I have found it," said Mr. Rowe, smiling too, as he hung the key above the tall clock beside the desk. "There, the little squirrel won't reach that nail this year, or next," added he triumphantly, and he followed his wife to the dining-room, where the 3 children were waiting for their dinner. Molly was in high spirits. Mr. Nye had brought her home from school in his new dog-cart, and he had promised some day to take his little daughter Kisty and Weezy and herself to drive in the park. Could they go? Oh, did her mother think they could? Then Kirk had his story to tell about Miss Bailey, his favourite teacher, who that morning had been summoned to the bedside of her sick mother, and about Miss Cumston, the new substitute, that couldn't keep order. During a recitation, Jimmy Maguire crawled halfway down the aisle to say that Ben Cugley would sell his toy printing press for $3. Might Kirk buy it? Oh, did his father think he might? The lively chat continued through the meal. and nothing more was said or thought about the key to the writing desk. After dinner, Mr. Rowe went to his office, and Molly and Kirk hurried to school, leaving Weezy in the sitting room tending Sambo. Mrs. Rowe had gone upstairs to finish mending a curtain when Weezy frisked into the dining room, clutching Sambo by the button of his cap. "See poor ittle Sambo, Visa," cried she in a tone of the deepest sympathy. "Sambo's got him mumps. Bust dust, like Ellen. Dear, dear. If the little fellow has got the mumps, he must stay where it's warm," cried Louisa, hastening to clear away the table. "Take him back to the fire this minute, and here's a lump of sugar for him. The sugar will keep Weezy out of mischief long enough for me to wash the silver," mused she, bringing a bowl of hot water. "Des Weezy'll walk Sambo. Des him feel besser," prattled Weezy, running off to her little rocking chair in one corner of the sitting room. As she swayed to and fro with the ailing doll in her arms, she all at once spied the key over the clock. It looked very odd there, very much out of place. "Oh, my tars!" cried she, greatly astonished. "What for's Papa's key flied up so high, you believe? Oh, hum! Wis eyes a big, bouncin' an angel, so I'd go up and get it." She looked at Sambo in her lap. Surely a tender was not an angel, but why couldn't he knock down the key as well as anybody? Dancing across the floor, she tossed him as high as she could. That was as high as the writing desk, and he fell upon the top of it, flat upon his flat nose. "Oh, hum," muttered Weezy, climbing into a chair. "'Spect I's got to go, my Seef." "Lie till, Sambo, Isa," she cried, scrambling from the chair to the broad ledge of the desk. She stood upon the ledge a moment, resting her chin upon the shelf where Sambo lay. "Des I tan det it. Weezy isn't ittle and frayed dirl," said she cheerily, preparing to mount. Clinging to the rail of the desk, she climbed up beside the doll, and springing to her feet, reached for the key. She could just touch it with the tips of her fingers. "Oh, dee. Wis Weezy's arm was growed bigger, fretted she, scowling down upon Sambo, still flat upon his nose. Aha! There was another way to make him of service. She could use him for a cricket. How her mamma would have shuddered if she had seen her little girl at that moment, poised on tiptoe upon Sambo's back. But Weezy was agile as a kitten. She did not fall, though she presently made the key fall with a clatter. A few minutes later, Louisa peeped in at the door and discovered the writing desk open, and Weezy busily cutting paper dolls out of one of her father's deeds. When Mrs. Rowe showed them to him at tea-time, Mr. Rowe was a good deal vexed. "That was an important deed, Mary, and the loss of it will cause me much trouble," said he. "How did Weezy get hold of the key of the desk?" "Dickory, dickory, dock, the mouse ran up the clock," answered Mrs. Rowe with a grave smile. "Do you mean to say that baby helped herself to the key?" cried Mr. Rowe, actually turning pale. "It's a mercy that she didn't break her neck." "Poh! I don't think that was much of a climb," said Kirk. "Weezy's twice as spry as Molly. She's rather too spry, and altogether too daring, like a certain small boy that I know," said Mr. Rowe. "You were right, Mary. We must teach Weezy not to meddle with things, for it is plain that we can't put things beyond her reach." Chapter 6. Unca Docker's beard. Weezy's Sambo had hardly rallied from the mumps when she herself was attacked by the same disease. One afternoon her face and throat began to swell, and by the next morning she looked like a fat young Eskimo. "Oh, ho! What a cheeky little girl! I never saw a little girl so cheeky," cried Kirk, laughing merrily, at his first glimpse of her, bolstered up in her mother's bed. "I isn't cheeky. Ittle girl, make him top, mamma," moaned wretched little Weezy, beginning to cry. "Now, mamma, I didn't mean to tease her. I didn't, honest," exclaimed Kirk, balancing himself across the footboard. "She cries as easy as a wink." "Oh, she does she?" said Dr. Wyman, bustling in. "Well, my young man, we must forgive her. Mumps seldom make people jolly." "Oh, Unca Docker, I don't want any more mumps," wailed Weezy, reaching out both hands. One held the comb with which she had been arranging Viola Maud's blonde wig. Viola Maud was the lovely great wax doll that Mrs. Rowe called her own, and lent to Weezy only when the little girl was ill or unhappy. "Of course you don't want any more mumps, dearie, and so you're going to stay in Mamma's room and keep quiet," said her uncle cheerfully, sitting down beside the bed. "But the mumps is here, Unca Docker. They's got up in," replied Weezy, in a discouraged tone. "Is that so?" asked Dr. Wyman, pretending to be very serious. "Then, I tell you what we'll do to get 'em out. We'll take some castor oil." "Mumps don't like castor oil, don't they?" said Weezy, deeply interested. "I was afraid she would object to taking medicine, and I am agreeably disappointed," thought the doctor, sending Kirk at once for a teaspoon and a little milk in an egg glass. But when Dr. Wyman had poured some oil into the milk and brought it to Weezy, it became evident that there had been a misunderstanding. "No, no. Monka Docker, take slippy oil at hisef. Onka Docker, make naughty mumps go away. Wheezy." "Don't want slippy oil," cried she, putting her hands over her mouth. Plainly she reasoned that, provided the medicine was swallowed, it did not matter who swallowed it, and if Unca Docker had not meant to do his part in driving out the mumps, why had he said, "Oh, we'll take some castor oil"? Dr. Wyman disliked to scold a little girl who looked so feverish and heavy-eyed, and he began to talk to Weezy in a coaxing manner. "Come, darling," said he, "if you'll take this like a good little lady, the minute you are well, I'll give you a nice long ride." Weezy shook her head, being sufficiently shrewd to know that she could have the drive without the medicine. "Well, if you'll take it, I'll tell you a story." "A great long Tory," said Weezy, pricking up her ears. "A Tory long as this house?" "Not quite as long as this house, perhaps," returned Dr. Wyman, "but as long as a hen house, we'll say. It's a story about a chicken. About a truly chicken. A egg chicken? Yes, about a truly egg chicken. Now, open your mouth. And may I comb t'yous wixers all the time what you's telling?" persisted Weezy, pausing with the cup at her lips. "Yes, yes," said her uncle with a wry face, for his whiskers were nearly as long as Weezy's arm, and he always winced when she dragged the comb through them. Without another word, Weezy shut her eyes and emptied the glass. After Kirk had carried the teaspoon and glass downstairs and gone off to school, Dr. Wyman began his story. Chicken Little came to town very unexpectedly. "Did he wide?" interrupted his listener, flourishing her brush. "Yes. He rode all wrapped up in an eggshell blanket. If you don't believe it, you can ask my Aunt Lovejoy. When she comes this summer, she lives in Indianapolis, and the first call Chicken Little made in the city, he made at her house." "Who did he call?" asked Weezy, beginning to braid her uncle's beard into little tails. "Whom did he call? Oh, he called Aunt Lovejoy," replied Dr. Wyman, laughing to himself. "You see, this was how it happened. It was a hot morning, and Aunt Lovejoy was in the kitchen, stirring up a pudding for dinner, when Tilly was her German girl, came home from market with a basket of eggs. Tilly set the basket on the table and went round to the corner grocery for something, a yeast cake, I think it likely. They eat bread at Aunt Lovejoy's." "Course," put in Weezy with disdain. "Yes, sometimes it's an course, and then again sometimes it is fine," continued her teasing uncle. "Well, all this while, you must understand, Aunt Lovejoy was going on, stirring her pudding, and, as she stirred, she kept hearing a little sharp clicking noise. At first, she supposed it was made by her spoon hitting the bowl, but when she stopped stirring, she heard the noise just the same, and it seemed to come from the market basket on the table. Aunt Lovejoy said to herself that there must be a dreadful ringing in her ears, and I've no doubt she blamed her doctor for having given her so much quinine. But before she finished stoning her raisins, the sound had grown so loud that she ran to the basket. As she raised the cover, something said to her, "Peep, peep." "I know, Unca Docker, I know," shouted Weezy, forgetting her sore throat. "Chicken Little was in the back seat. What a bright girl. How could you guess?" said her uncle. "Yes, you are right. There sat Chicken Little in an eggshell, sticking his yellow head out just far enough to play peekaboo with Aunt Lovejoy. Had he got his eyes open?" asked Weezy anxiously, thinking of her blind kitten. "Got his eyes open? I should say he had, and his mouth too," answered Dr. Wyman, cringing at an unexpected snarl in his beard. "Don't you believe the little fellow was glad to find somebody to speak to that was alive? Those eggs must have been poor company for a wide-awake chicken. How did he get out?" asked Weezy, bringing her uncle back to the main point. "After a while, He broke out. He pecked and pecked with his bill, till he had made a hole in the eggshell big enough to squeeze through, and then he marched forth, stretching his wings, first one and then the other, to show Aunt Lovejoy how yellow and downy they were. He was pretty hungry by this time, so Aunt Lovejoy mixed some cornmeal and water in a cup, and— Here the door flew open, and Kirk dashed in, crying, "Come quick, Uncle Doctor! Oh, please come quick as ever you can! My teacher's most killed. Not Miss Cumstan, but to pretty Miss Bailey. Where have they taken her?" asked Dr. Wyman, with a rueful glance at his beard, hopelessly tangled into 6 little tails, which Weezy called braids. "Into my classroom. She came back to school only this morning, and a horse and carriage got frightened and ran into her," sobbed Kirk, half frantic. "They sent me and another boy to bring you. Oh, Uncle, do hurry!" "I'll go this instant," said he, rising. He had been hastily attempting to comb out the braids, but he now threw down the comb in despair and seized his hat. "I look like a picture in a comic almanac," thought he, as he pressed on with the boys, "but that is no reason why I should keep that suffering girl waiting. They say Miss Bailey's broken her bones," Kirk further explained as they drew near the schoolhouse. "She's fainted all in a heap." When Dr. Wyman entered the classroom, she had rallied from the fainting fit, and her arm was paining her severely. She was so weak and nervous that at sight of tall, dignified Dr. Wyman, with his beard plaited like a girl's hair, she began to laugh, though it mortified her to be so rude. "I wear my whiskers in this style because my little niece is ill, Miss Bailey," said the doctor humorously. "Now, if you please, I'll examine your arm." It proved to be a small bone that had been fractured, and he was glad to be able to assure Miss Bailey that in a few weeks she would be as well as ever. Having properly attended to the arm, and promised to call the next day, Dr. Wyman went home through a back street, and spent a whole hour by the clock in smoothing out the comical little braids under his chin. Chapter 7. Weezy's Sambo. Mr. Rowe was fond of fun, and he seized the first opportunity to joke Dr. Wyman on his droll adventure. "Ah, Doctor, I understand you're getting so vain that, before calling upon the ladies, you have your beard crimped," said he, overtaking him on the street. "I suppose next you'll be having it rolled on curl papers." "I suppose I shall, if my fair young barber so wills it," replied Dr. Wyman sportively. "I only hope she won't prefer to curl it with tongs." "Very well. If you choose to let Weezy make a guy of you, why, you can," said Mr. Rowe good-naturedly, "but one thing is certain. I shan't let her make a guy of me cent." "Don't be too sure of it. She may take you unaware," returned the doctor with a smile, as Mr. Rowe entered his own door. Weezy had come downstairs that morning so nearly well that Viola Maud had been wrapped in tissue paper and laid away. Weezy did not miss her much. She had so many dolls of her own. Indeed, she had more than she could keep properly supplied with features and limbs, for the 6 had only 4 noses among them, and not half enough arms to go round. "You's cross little girl, Eva, snarled you's face all up," said Weezy, climbing to the sitting-room window-sill with her bruised gutta-percha baby. "Dess all tawed, too. Oh, I be shame. Now you musses clean house for punish you." She began to rub the doll up and down the glass in a brisk way, extremely annoying to Kirk, upon the sofa taking his turn with Mumps. "You call that fun, miss, do you?" growled he from the depths of the Afghan. "Oh, defil fun, but this is funner," cried she with provoking sweetness, turning Eva upside down to polish the window-pane with her head. "Oh, do stop that racket, Weezy. It makes my head ache. Please run out and see the kitties." "Oh, ho! I most didn't think 'bout the kitties," exclaimed Weezy, throwing down the doll and skipping away to the cat's basket in the back entry. There were 3 kittens, 2 white, and 1 grey, all except a white spot at the tip of his tail. The grey was Weezy's favourite. She waked this from its morning nap, and pulled it out of its warm nest to carry it to Kirk. "Loot. He's the Tantiptail. Kitty. He makes up faces. He can't help Hasif," said she charitably. "Help himself. I should like to see the poor little fellow help himself when you pick him up by the neck that way," cried Kirk scornfully, raising himself on his elbow. "Kitty's a mama. Picks Kitty up that way viv her moof, I assawed her," retorted Weezy triumphantly. Dropping her little mewing burden upon the lounge beside her brother, she suddenly discovered that the kitty's eyelids had parted far enough to disclose a glimmer of blue. "Oh, Loot, Loot," shouted she, hopping up and down in transport. Kitty's eyes is unshutting. Is that a fact, little girl?" Why, you don't say so," cried her father, who had that moment parted from Dr. Wyman at the gate. "They is, Papa, they truly is," cried Weezy, trying to blow open Kitty's three-cornered eyelids as she had seen Molly blow open the petals of a rosebud. Stop, little daughter," called Mr. Rowe, laughing. "Her eyes are not like blue gentians. You can't pry into them without hurting Kitty. I'd give her back to her mother and run and find Sambo." Sambo was Weezy's pet doll, made of worsted yarn, pink face, blue jacket, yellow trousers, and all. It injured other members of her family to be dipped into the bathtub, or dumped into the coal hod, but Sambo could bear rough treatment. He was so strong and well knit. Oh, he was a doll to be depended on, and from the crown of his red cap to the soles of his green shoes, Weezy loved every inch of him. Yet on occasion she could discipline him strictly, and when after a long hunt she found him under the hall mat, she shook him till one of his bead eyes fell off. "What for, Sambo, you yun, away and hide?" scolded she. "I shall be 'bliged to tie Sambo, for cause Sambo didn't mind." But to what should she tie the naughty little wretch? Frisking about the hall, she spied upon the hat tree her father's overcoat. She could just reach the buttons on its back. "Does you see that button, Sambo?" said she severely. "Well, I's going to tie you to that button till you's a good boy. I's a sorry to hurt you, Sambo, but I does it for the news good." As she talked, she was winding the ends of Sambo's scarf around the button, and she ran in to dinner, leaving the poor doll swinging to and fro like a queer kind of tassel. Mr. Rowe chanced to be in haste that noon, and before Weezy had finished her plate of custard pudding, he asked to be excused from the table, and went out into the hall to get ready to go downtown. It was so dark there that he put on his overcoat without noticing what was attached to it. Then he caught up his hat and gloves and stepped briskly into the street with Sambo bobbing up and down behind him. The faster Mr. Rowe walked, the higher Sambo jumped and kicked. Oh, it was very, very funny. Jimmy Maguire laughed so hard at the sight that he rolled off the doorstep where he had been sitting. A group of boys on the corner shouted and clapped their hands. Mr. Rowe could not see anything to laugh at. He wondered what all the excitement was about. He might have gone the entire length of Main Street with Sambo's yellow legs dancing a jig at his back, if he had not at the next crossing come upon Dr. Wyman, waiting for a streetcar. "Good afternoon," said the doctor, with a roguish twinkle in his eye. "I hope you and your friend are enjoying your walk." "Friend? What friend?" "I fail to see the joke," returned Mr. Rowe, wheeling so abruptly that Sambo bounced against him and struck him between the shoulders. "It's a joke that Weezy has had a hand in, I fancy," said Dr. Wyman, chuckling, as Mr. Rowe gazed savagely about for the person who had hit him. "Turn your head, my stiff-necked friend. Now look down, and try to see yourself as others see you." When Mr. Rowe beheld Sambo swaying backward and forward like the pendulum of a clock, he could not help laughing himself, though his face grew very red. "I must say I've cut a pretty figure, and I don't blame the boys for shouting," said he, groping behind him for the doll. "Do, Doctor, tear the thing off somehow. Quick, for here comes your car with 30 pairs of eyes in it." Dr. Wyman speedily unwound the scarf, and presented Sambo to Mr. Rowe with a bow, saying jestingly, "Ah, you are the gentleman, I believe, who an hour ago boasted that Weezy shouldn't make a guy of him." Mr. Rowe shrugged his shoulders. "I've half a mind to toss this ridiculous image into the gutter," said he, as Dr. Wyman swung himself upon the car. But then he thought of his little daughter, and instead of throwing Sambo away, he crammed him, head first, into his pocket. "I'll take him home to Weezy this time," said he to himself, "but if she ever hangs him onto my coat-tail again, I'll burn him up, cap and boots." Chapter 8. Weezy's Figs. "Well, Kirk, my lad, you need not mope indoors any longer," said Dr. Wyman, calling in at the Rose the next Monday morning. "I pronounce you quite well enough to go to school. Rather stay at home, a great sight," muttered Kirk, playing with the tip-tail kitten. "Nonsense. Why, I thought you liked to go to school." Did like it when Miss Bailey was there, but now they've put that tall, strapping Miss Cumston in her place, and Miss Cumston is to blame, I suppose, for being tall and strapping, whatever that may be. Oh, she's homely, and she's cross, and besides all that, she's mean. She bangs the boys against the piano and gets it out of tune, and then, sir, she makes 'em pay for tuning it. Easy, my boy, easy. Mustn't tell tales, said Dr. Wyman gravely. I dare say Miss Cumston isn't half so black as the scholars have painted her, but anyway, she won't be likely to come in your way again very soon, for Miss Bailey's arm has got well, and she is going back to school this morning. Good, 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 cried Kirk, dropping the kitten and skipping out into the backyard, where Weezy was, to relieve his feelings by turning a somersault. I don't see how you'll get along without me to amuse you, miss, said he loftily, but I'm going to school. Miss Bailey's come back, and I'm going a-kiting. Sir, be still. Stepping on my dollies, said Weezy, not at all impressed by the news, if indeed she had heard it. She was very, very busy, for she had a garden to make, and nothing to do it with but an iron spoon and a tin mustard box. Ho! Call and toes, dollies, do you? Cried Kirk, hopping cautiously over a row of poppies standing on their heads on the lower step. And I should call 'em posies. He need not have gone off laughing. The poppies, in their ruffled scarlet skirts, made very nice dollies for a little girl used to dolls without arms, and their green leaf aprons were neat and becoming. Jingle, jingle, up the street. "'Spect that's the bigger man," said Weezy, tumbling over her spoon in her haste to tell Louisa. "Bigger man's coming, bigger man's coming," shouted she, running into the kitchen, where her mother was helping about the fruit-cake. "Dear me! If he is a tramp, I don't want him to come into the house," exclaimed Mrs. Rowe. "Do take him out something to eat, Louisa." Louisa hurried to the pantry as fast as she could, for a bowl of bread and milk. Then she heard the man coming up the walk, and she ran back to the kitchen to hand it to him before he should have time to enter. "Here's something for you," said she, opening the door just far enough to put the bowl through. "You can sit down outside on the doorstep and eat it." Instead of taking the bowl, the man began to laugh, and Louisa opened the door wider, and saw he was Mr. Blake, and to Baker. "Beg your pardon, sir. Beg your pardon, sir, sir," stammered she, very much confused. "The little girl said you were a beggar man." And upon that she began to laugh too, and laughed so hard that Mrs. Rowe herself had to give the order for 2 graham loaves and a loaf of sponge cake. "Run, dear, and get Mamma's purse off the bureau," said she to Weezy. "I want to pay Mr. Blake some money." The child brought the purse, and looked on while the bread and cake were being paid for. "Here, dear," said her mother, shaking some soiled visiting cards out of the portemonnaie. "You may have these to play with. Now put Mamma's purse back where you found it." Weezy was gone some time, but presently she ran down again to her garden. Mrs. Rowe would not have felt so easy stoning raisins in the pantry if she had known the baker had left the gate unfastened. Weezy was not long in discovering the fact. Unfortunately, she still held the cards in her hand. They gave her an idea. "Weezy'll go a-calling," said she, whisking through the gateway, with a backward glance to see if anybody was looking. She felt quite equal to the undertaking, for hadn't she been visiting once with her mother and carried the card case all the way? "Come in, you pretty little pet," that's what the lady'll say. She prattled on to herself, climbing the steps of the first house around the corner, dragging armless Sambo after her by the stocking yarn hair. Oh, what a high-up bell! Even on tiptoe she could not reach it. She laid Sambo down and stood on top of him, but even then could only touch the bell knob with the tips of her fingers. "Oh, my Suze, guess I'll have to knock." And she did knock, so very gently that nobody in the world could have heard her. "People's gone away off," said she, slipping a card under the door, as she had seen her mumma do when nobody answered her ring. "Weezy'll give 'em a card for when they come back. Don't want to be a selfish girl." After that she did not try to pull any more bell knobs, but contented herself with leaving cards at every house on that side of the street. One happened to be a church, and another an oyster saloon, but it was all the same to Weezy. When she reached the provision store on the second corner from home, she had only a single card left. As the door stood open, she carried it in, and ran up to a pleasant-looking clerk who was sorting apples. "I've come calling," said she blandly, sitting down on a pile of codfish. "What upon earth?" cried the young man, starting in surprise at the droll little figure. "Me and Sambo, we've come a-calling," repeated Weezy, holding up the long-suffering dolly. "Sambo's tired. Take him, please." "Thank you. No, you must excuse me." "What's your name, Grandmother Gripsy?" "Weezy Rowe," replied she, drumming her small boot heels against the codfish, in some resentment at being called grandmother. "Where do you live?" What made folks for ever and ever ask her that? She drew in her lips till there wasn't a snip of scarlet to be seen. She was so afraid she should tell, for she shrewdly suspected the man wanted to send her home. In offering Sambo to the clerk, she had dropped her card, and it lay on the floor, face upward, with Mrs. Edwin Rowe, number 6 Oak Street, written very clearly upon it. "Is that yours?" asked the young man, reading the address. "It's my mamma's. We use 'em when we go a-calling," said she, with a longing glance at the apples. "I like apples, I do." The clerk ran to the door and called out to a boy in a market wagon. "Here, Jim, you have orders on Oak Street. Leave this bundle at number 6, will you?" Then, almost before Weezy knew it, he had lifted her and Sambo upon the seat and given the boy the card so he could not mistake the direction. The horse trotted off at a brisk pace, and the square baskets on the floor of the wagon danced up and down the middle. These were filled with vegetables and other articles that people had ordered for their dinners, and Weezy's driver stopped every now and then at a door to leave one. She found it great fun to go about in this fashion, and was having a most delightful time when they drew up at her father's house on Oak Street. "But I don't want to be home," said she, with a twinge of conscience at the thought of meeting her mother, for in the depths of her little heart she knew it was wrong to run away. But when the boy lured her with a paper of figs, she was wonderfully soothed. She let him lift her down at once and skipped past him through the back gate. Of course, he ought to have gone in with her and told her mother where he had found her, but being a bashful boy, he did no such thing. He watched her in at the kitchen door and then drove off. Nobody had missed Weezy. Her mother was upstairs combing her hair when the child came in with her frock full of figs. "See what I've got for Mamma." "Why, where did you get them, child?" Way off," replied Weezy evasively. "Isn't they good?" Mrs. Rowe looked at her little daughter in amazement. She had run against a molasses barrel in the store, and smeared her dress, and then whitened it in spots with flour, and as her mother raised her on her lap, she perceived an unmistakable odor of fish about her. "Weezy, where have you been?" said she sternly. "Tell Mamma the truth." "Riding way off," persisted the child, sobbing now. "But who gave you the figs?" "Oh, the queer old boy I went a-riding with." Mrs. Rowe opened the window and gazed up street and down, but did not see any queer old boy. What could be the meaning of this wild story? Louisa knew nothing about it, and surely, thought Mrs. Rowe, if a man had brought my baby home, he would have left her in somebody's care. Could Weezy have got the figs at the grocery opposite? Her mother had sometimes let her run over there to buy a cent's worth of peanuts while she stood in the doorway watching her, but the grocer was not fond of children. That he should have given her the figs seemed unlikely. Mrs. Rowe's purse still lay on the bureau where Weezy had put it. Mrs. Rowe unclasped it with an uneasy feeling. She distinctly remembered that, after paying the baker, there had been left a dime and a roll of bills, and now the dime was gone. Mrs. Rowe recollected with a throb of pain that Weezy had been a long time in carrying back the portemonnaie. "Mamma has lost some money," said she. "Does Weezy know anything about it?" "No'm," sobbed the child, terrified by her mother's solemn tone. "Didn't my little daughter buy figs with it?" "Think a minute." "No, she didn't," said Weezy, smothering herself in her apron. Mrs. Rowe was distressed. "It was very naughty to spend Mamma's money," said she gravely, "but it would be a great deal naughtier if Weezy should tell a wrong story about it. I didn't mean to." "I'm so sorry," cried the baby. "Weezy, 'twill be good, and Mother's darling won't ever do such a dreadful thing again, will she?" said Mrs. Rowe, much relieved. "Don't you think Mamma ought to tie those wicked hands to make them remember?" "Yes'm," said Weezy meekly. 5 minutes after, Lavisa knocked at the door. Weezy sat on the bed, her chubby wrists bound together by a neck ribbon. "Here's a dime, Mrs. Rowe, that I found under the kitchen table. I suppose you dropped it in making change." Weezy didn't. "Take Mamma's money," shouted the little gypsy gleefully. "Isn't it so? Nice Weezy didn't take Mamma's money." "The next time I punish Weezy, I will try to be sure we both know what the punishment is for," thought Mrs. Rowe, as, between laughing and crying, she untied the child's hands. "How shall I ever learn to bring up my baby?" Chapter 9. Kirk and Jimmy. Weezy was so tired after this that she went to sleep in her high chair at the dinner table. Papa laid her on the sitting-room lounge, and she slept on, till, late in the afternoon, the slamming of the gate waked her. A second after, the porch door creaked, and Kirk skipped into the room in his butternut suit, as eager and frolicsome as a tan terrier. "Oh, you just ought to see Miss Bailey," cried he, spinning about on one foot like a humming top. "You just ought to see her." "Weezy want to see too," yawned his little sister, rubbing her eyes. "I'm glad you have your old teacher back again, my dear," said Mamma, setting her work-basket on the table out of reach, for things had such a trick of upsetting wherever Kirk was. "Yes, and I tell you what, Mamma, she's nice," said Kirk, standing his slate up endwise and sitting down upon it. "She's some like Aunt Louisa, and she's some like you, but she's most of all like Grammy. Indeed. What a dear old lady she must be," said Mrs. Rowe mischievously. "Now, Mamma, she isn't old, you know she isn't. She's just as young as she can be. Only she's like Grammy because she looks a goody. She doesn't peek through glasses like that great cross Miss Cumston, and shake her finger at a boy when he moves his lips a little easy. No, sir, she's real kind and pleasant, and I'm going to be as still as a mouse in Herland's school." But his slate slipping, Kirk's mother saw just then a noisy little boy sitting down hard upon the floor. "I'm glad your intentions are so good," said she, tenderly smoothing his thick brown hair, which wouldn't stay parted, and would hang straight over his eyes, making his head look like a little haycock, or an old-fashioned English beehive. "Now you have entered the intermediate grade, I want you to be a manly little fellow." "Me too, Mamma," put in Weezy, anxious to be whatever Kirk was. "Oh, you silly, silly goosey," shouted Kirk merrily. "Molly, come in and hear Weezy. She wants to be a boy." "No, I don't. I don't. Shoes. The world," cried Weezy, rolling off the lounge in high resentment. Now, I must tell you that for one whole week after Miss Bailey came back, Kirk was a model boy, out of pure love to his old teacher, but then came review day, which always was a day of temptation to Kirk. He didn't see the use of studying what he knew already, and the figures he made on his slate he certainly couldn't have copied from the arithmetic, though he had ciphered through long division. First he drew something which would have been a circle if it had only been round, and placed inside it 2 big O's, with a tall straight line between them, and the sign of subtraction beneath. This stood for a woman's head, though you might just as easily have supposed it was a tea plate, with 2 doughnuts and 2 sticks of candy in it. Kirk thought it a very good head indeed, and he put such a furious mop of hair on it that he quite wore out his slate pencil. Then he perched the head on a sort of pincushion with 2 club feet, and over the whole wrote a Miss Cumstan in chalk letters. Kirk always put down the names of his portraits nowadays. He found it saved awkward blunders. No danger this time of anybody's taking his drawing for a pepper box on stilts. He felt an artist's pride in his work, and with one eye on his spelling book and the other on Miss Bailey, he passed the slate across the aisle for Jimmy Maguire's approval. "She ain't got no arms," whispered Jimmy, who had never heard of a grammar. "Pencil's gone up," answered Kirk, behind his hand. "Give her here, I'll fix her," said Jimmy, grasping the slate. Miss Bailey was busy at the desk, but she had quick ears, for all the gold bells in them, and she looked up in the direction of the sound. Kirk seemed to be studying with all his might, but Jimmy, putting on Miss Cumstan's arms with dashing strokes, looked anything but studious. "Bring me the slate, Jimmy," said Miss Bailey, satisfied that no example in the simple rules could require such peculiar figuring. Jimmy dared not disobey, though he did manage to blur the image with his left elbow as he went along. "Lay the slate on the desk and remain after school, James," said Miss Bailey. "I want to talk with you." and Jimmy took his seat with head very high, for the boys were all looking but with spirits fearfully low. You wouldn't have thought that he cared one bit. Somehow, it would seem that a boy in such an ugly jacket, and with so many warts on his hands, couldn't have much feeling. Why, all the boys would have laughed at the idea of his minding being talked to, this Jimmy Maguire, who was always getting feruled. But Jimmy did mind, because Miss Bailey, ever since she came to the school, had spoken kindly to him and treated him as if he was somebody. Kindness was a new thing to him, and he liked it. But now it was all over with him. Miss Bailey would inquire about him and find out that his father was in the state prison, and of course she would hate him, just as everybody else did. And there sat Kirk Rowe looking as innocent as a jack-in-the-pulpit. Nobody suspected him of getting into scrapes. His father wasn't a jailbird. "Are you going to tell on me, Jimmy?" whispered Kirk at recess. The boys were in the yard, with a long flight of stairs and 2 closed doors between them and the schoolroom, but Kirk couldn't speak aloud. "Tell on you? No, baby, I don't tell tales," said Jim fiercely. "But you better keep your old slate at home next time, or I will." Kirk felt relieved. That very morning Miss Bailey had patted him on the shoulder, calling him her good boy, and now he always would be good. He wouldn't draw any more pictures, and nobody need know anything about the forenoon's mischief. He hadn't got caught whispering. If Jim had, Jim must bear the blame. He didn't ask Jim to draw Miss Cumstan's arms, and put a ferule in one hand and a book in the other. It wasn't his fault if Jim did get talked to, so Kirk went home at noon among the good deportment scholars, and tried to believe that the reason he felt so uncomfortable was that he was hungry. As if he didn't know better. He knew, as well as you do, that he had been a very mean little boy. But he didn't say anything about it. Not he. He only grumbled at everything, and made himself more disagreeable than a grown man 5 times as large could possibly have done, if he had tried with all his might. His mother couldn't think what ailed him, unless he was coming down with measles. "I'm going to have a birthday tomorrow, and Kisty'll have a birthday too," said Little Weezy. "Well, what of it?" said Kirk crossly, and hurried out of the house. He was trying to hush his troublesome mite of a conscience, which kept telling him, over and over again, that he ought to confess to Miss Bailey that he drew the picture. It is just possible that he might have done so before school in the afternoon, if Jimmy hadn't made mouths at him as he came down the aisle. Kirk couldn't stand that, and he got very angry indeed. He didn't care what happened to Jimmy. He hated him. He hated Miss Bailey. She had green eyes. After that, it really seemed as if Kirk couldn't be naughty enough. In the arithmetic class, he chalked the seams of Peter Flint's jacket, stupid Peter Flint, who never could tell how many grains make a scruple, and afterwards, when Miss Bailey was writing a question on the blackboard for the boys to perform, it is dreadful to think of, he blacked his own face with a bit of coal, at which Jimmy Maguire laughed outright. Miss Bailey turned around in dismay. If an example in reduction wouldn't keep a boy sober, what would? "James Maguire," said she severely, "I cannot excuse this second misdemeanor. At recess you will report yourself in this room for punishment." But behind Jimmy at recess came a very frightened little boy, the roguery crowded out of his eyes by tears. "Please, Miss Bailey," said Kirk, winking very fast, "it's that's to blame." "'Twas I, playing chimney-sweep, that made Jimmy laugh. I drew the picture too this morning, all but the arms, and I whispered as much as Jim did." The story was out now, and in spite of himself, Kirk's handkerchief had to come out too. Just like any girl's, though, maybe. Girls' handkerchiefs are not usually made into rabbits, as Kirk's was. Miss Bailey was surprised and grieved to find her pet boy had been so naughty, though she forgave him in a minute, with a smile for all the world like Grammy's. But Jimmy, poor Jimmy, there he stood, as stock-still as an exclamation point, too astonished to speak. Just think of that little snip of a Kirk Rowe owning up to a trick he hadn't been caught in. Poor Jim couldn't understand it. He hadn't had any bringing up, you know. But it gave him a clearer idea of honesty than he had ever had in his life before, and did him as much good as it did Kirk, which is saying a great deal. Chapter 10. The birthday drive. The day Weezy was 4 years old, Kirsty Nye was 5, quite old enough to be called Christine, if the family had thought about it. Mrs. Nye had made her little daughter a birthday cake and invited Weezy to supper. Ellen Nolan was not now at Mrs. Rose. She was attending a primary school. "I'm a year older than I was yesterday, Mama," said Weezy that afternoon, when her mother was tying her bonnet. "Pretty soon won't I be every teenty speck as old as Kisty?" Before Mrs. Rowe could reply, Weezy was whisking down the gravel walk, dragging behind her a dustpan tied to a string. The dustpan held 2 dolls and a clay pipe. "Oh ho, Weezy, I shouldn't suppose you'd let your dolls smoke a pipe. My dollies are never smoke pipes." "You're a naughty boy to say so," cried Weezy, much offended. "Ah, I know now," said Kirk, with an innocent air. "You smoke that pipe yourself." "Oh, Kirk, what? A story? Kisty and I blow bubbles with it. You know we do." "Oh, Kisty Nye blows bubbles," said Kirk, pretending not to understand. "And why don't you blow 'em too?" "Well, I said I did. I said, Kisty and I blow bubbles," cried Weezy pettishly, twitching her dustpan carriage out of the way of her brother's stilts as he hopped through the gate. "Yes, Kisty Nye blows bubbles." "Just what you said, and this makes twice you've said it," cried teasing Kirk, slamming the gate behind him. "I don't like to have folks shut gates in my faces," grumbled Weezy, pushing it open in high displeasure. "I think you're a very plaguing-y boy." Kirk laughed and stooped down to close the sweet little scolding mouth with a sugar plum. "Old Mr. Nye gave me 3 of 'em, and I saved one for you," said he. "Who says I'm a plaguing-y brother? You are not plaguing-y now any more," said Weezy serenely. "Oh, wish old Nye would give me 3 sugar plums myself." Once more in gay good humour, she trudged along with Kirk to Kisty's house, not far up the street, and, the moment she saw Kisty, threw both arms about her waist. It was a chubby waist, for Kisty was a chubby little girl, broader than Weezy, though not an inch taller. "Oh, I know something Len-did," said Kisty, squeezing her fat palms together very hard. "We're going to have something, guess what?" "Pin nuts," suggested Weezy breathlessly. "Better'n peanuts, something that hasn't any shell onto it." "Gumdrops? No, no. You can't guess, cried Kisty triumphantly. "They grow on trees, and they have seeds in the middle. Watermelons." "I about know them's, cried Weezy, giving Kisty another hug. "Puh! Watermelons don't grow on trees. Watermelons grow on bushes, ever so low on the ground. I've seen 'em in Grandpa's garden," said Kisty, proudly reflecting that she knew a great deal more than Weezy, who was only 4 years old. "Honest?" "Well, sugar gooseberries then," said Weezy, considerably crushed. "No, indeed. Those don't grow. Those are baked in the oven." "I shall have to tell. It's apples red, ripe apples." Weezy clapped her hands. "Ned is going into the country to buy the apples, and Mamma says for him to take us with him in the new dog-cart," said Kisty, fairly out of breath with the excitement of spreading the good news. Weezy screamed with delight, and, leaving the dolls flat on their backs under the lilacs, scampered off to the stable, Kisty following as fast as her clumsy fat legs would carry her. They found Ned backing the horse into the thills of the dog-cart. "Mamma says, 'Ned, you must buy a bushel of the best apples you can find,'" panted Kisty, running to the house again for her hat. "I rather think I'd better steal 'em," answered her tall brother, with a sly wink at Weezy. "Wouldn't you, Little Miss Weezy? Supposing we creep into every orchard we come to and taste of an apple on every tree in it, so we can pick out the nicest and fill our baskets with them? Don't you believe that would be the best way?" There was no response, but the young man had not looked for any. He was busy buckling the harness, and thought no more about Weezy, till, looking up presently, he saw Kisty climbing into the buggy all by herself. "Why," said he, "where's the other little birthday girl?" Kisty did not know. She ran to ask her mother, and her mother did not know. Weezy was not in the stable, or in the garden, or in the house. After a long search, Ned found her in the hammock at home, sobbing bitterly. Mrs. Rowe and Lavissa had locked the house and gone away, and the poor little girl was all alone, with nobody to speak to. "Ah, here you are, little runaway," said Ned playfully, pulling her hands from her wet eyes. "Isn't this a funny time to play hide-and-seek when you're going to drive and the horse is waiting for you?" "I'm not a-going. I don't want to ride. Wish you wouldn't bother." "Me," wailed she, rolling over upon her face. "Oh, come along, dear," urged Ned. "Come right along, before Kirsty cries herself sick. When we've got our apples, we'll go to see a red and green parrot I know of, that'll say, 'Walk in, have a chair.'" Weezy shook her head till her neck must have ached, and no amount of coaxing on Ned's part would induce her to go with him. He did not know what to make of her, and at last hurried home to ask what it was best to do. Mrs. Nye felt as uncomfortable about the occurrence as Ned did, and the moment she saw Mrs. Rowe enter her front door, she advised him to rush across to tell her the story. "I can't imagine what has come over Weezy," said he, catching up his hat. "I never knew her to act so before." As he paused on Mr. Rowe's doorstone to wipe his feet, he heard the child in the sitting-room sobbing, and this was what she was saying. "He was going to steal the apples, he truly was, Mamma."
"Suppose I'd ride with boys that steal?"
"Course I wouldn't. But oh, Mamma, it's Futch, a cunning doggy cart, and oh dear, I wish I had some apples." "You precious little goosey," cried Ned, bursting into the room, laughing. "Did you think I really meant to steal the apples? Why, Weezy, dear, I was just in fun. I wouldn't steal them any more than you would." "You said you would, you truly did," said Weezy, peeping through her fingers at him with an air of doubt. "I was making believe, pet, just making believe." "I'll leave it to your mother if I wasn't," said Ned gaily. "Come along with me, and I'll promise not to steal so much as an apple core." Picking her up, tears and all, he carried her away to his father's stable, where the horse still stood in the harness, and when he set her down in the dog-cart, her face was beaming with smiles. She had a lovely drive, and saw for herself that Ned did not steal a single apple, though he bought as many as the dog-cart would hold. And on their way back they called upon the parrot, and he invited them to walk in and have a chair, as politely as if he had been a gentleman. When they drove into Mr. Nye's yard, tea was ready, and the two little birthday girls sat side by side at the table, Kirsty in her high chair and Weezy in a common chair with the big dictionary in it, and each had a piece of the birthday cake, and all they wanted besides. And when by and by Ned went home with Weezy, he carried a beautiful little new basket filled with choice apples, and gave it to her to keep. So you see, Weezy had a pretty good kind of a birthday after all. Chapter 11. Weezy and Kirsty. It was more than a year after Weezy's birthday drive that Grandpa and Grandma Rowe came to her father's house to spend Thanksgiving. When they returned to the parsonage away up among the Berkshire hills, they took Weezy, and, that Weezy might not be homesick, they invited little Kirsty Nye to go with her. Weezy was 5 years old now, but, alas, no nearer Kirsty's age than she had been before, for Kirsty was now 6. They found at the parsonage Mr. Henry Bishop, Grandpa's oldest grandson, who took Weezy up in his lap and told her that he was her cousin, and that he boarded at Grandpa's and taught the village school. "Kirsty and I haven't ever been to school, not ever," said Weezy plaintively. "Please can't we go, Mr. Cousin Bishop?" "You? I'm afraid you don't know enough," said Mr. Bishop, patting her cheek. "Can you say all your letters?" "Most all, except 2 or 3 little ones," said Weezy briskly. "I can spell too." "Indeed? What can you spell?" "Oh, I can spell all the easy words, D-O-G, dog, C-A-T, cat, G-O-T, goat," said Weezy, proud of her knowledge. "Oh, I see you spell by sound the phonetic way," said Mr. Bishop, throwing back his head and laughing. "Don't know what is phonetic way," returned Weezy, rather disturbed. "My brother could spell it, I guess. Can spell awful hard words." Then she frisked away to beg Grandma to send her and Kirsty to school to Mr. Cousin Bishop. "What should I do without my dear little girls?" said Grandma, smiling over her spectacles. No, I couldn't spare them." But, by the close of the week, the dear little girls had become so tired and cross from endless romping that Grandma concluded she could spare them very well. The schoolhouse was near, and she thought it would be really better for them to go to school than to play all day long. So the next Monday morning she dressed them in their warm plaid gowns and sent them off, each with a cookie in her pocket. They were by far the smallest scholars of any, and Mr. Bishop soon found that when they were not at his knee, picking out their letters in the primer, it was puzzling to know what to do with them. If they sat together, they would whisper and make too much noise, and if they sat apart, Kirsty would go to sleep, and Weezy would be miserable. At last he hit upon the expedient of sending them out to play in the sunshine the moment they had recited. They liked this very much. Right behind the schoolhouse was a steep bank, down which the boys and girls coasted at noon, and at recess Kirsty and Weezy thought it fine fun to slide there all by themselves, and clumsy Kirsty did not mind a fall or two with only Weezy to see. One afternoon, indeed, she grew so daring that she slid standing up for the whole length of the slope, but unfortunately she lost her balance at the foot and pitched forward on her little snub nose. It bled furiously. Any nose would have bled, treated in that way, and Kirsty howled so dismally that Mr. Bishop heard her from his desk, and sent one of the large girls to bring her in. The girl found frightened Weezy mopping Kirsty's face with her own Mikado pocket handkerchief, and tugging with all her might to drag her up the bank. "This accident puts an end to your sport, little girls," said Mr. Bishop, after they were again in their seats. "I must forbid your sliding any more. I think it's real mean," whispered Weezy behind her primer. "He's just as unselfish as he can be." "'Tisn't his bank either," grumbled Kirsty. "I wish you wouldn't go and be such a little tumble-down girl, Kirsty and I," went on Weezy rather spitefully. "If you hadn't gone and hurt your nose, he would have let us slide some more." "Well, do you suppose I could help it, Weezy Rowe? Do you suppose I hurted my nose to purpose?" retorted Kirsty, burying her face in her apron. "Don't cry," said Weezy, putting both arms around Kirsty's neck. "Please not cry. It makes the blood leak out again." "The primer class next," called Mr. Bishop. Pulling her apron from her head, Kirsty followed Weezy down the aisle to his desk for their reading lesson. Mr. Bishop enjoyed his two little pupils, and had taken so much pains in teaching them that they could now spell out such sentences as, "Do we go up?" Quite glibly. "That'll do," said he, when they had finished the page, and had each spelled goat and coat 3 times over without missing. Then Weezy jogged Kirsty's elbow, and Kirsty jogged Weezy's, and it was Weezy that spoke first. "Please can't Kirsty and I go out and play?" "I hardly dare let you," replied Mr. Bishop regretfully. "Please," pleaded Weezy. "I'll hold on to Kirsty so tight she can't fall." "She'll hold on to me," echoed Kirsty. "Will you promise to take only one slide?" "Yes, sir, truly, but bear one," cried they in a breath. "Well, if you'll be very careful, I'll try you," said Mr. Bishop, smiling, and they ran away, 2 happy little children. They were gone so long that he entirely forgot them till late in the afternoon, when he was dismissing the school. Then, from a back window, he caught sight of them disappearing below the bank. Presently they climbed in view again, Weezy dragging Kirsty. 3 times they went up and down the slope, while Mr. Bishop stood watching them with a grave face, grieved to think they should have broken their promise to him. At last he rapped upon the pane, and they came dancing in, their cheeks glowing like cabbage roses. "I'm sorry I cannot trust my little girls," said he soberly, taking down his overcoat. Bashful Kirsty hung her head, but Weezy opened her great brown eyes in indignant wonder. "Sant, we haven't done anything," said she. "Think, Weezy, didn't you tell me you would take but 1 slide, and I've seen you take 3 myself." "Oh, no, honest, we never," cried Weezy. "Never now, certigly," echoed Kirsty. "Hush, children," said Mr. Bishop sternly. "It is very naughty to speak an untruth, and I say I saw you sliding." "Truly we slided only but just once," persisted Weezy, with an honest face. Kirsty pulled her apron over her head, sobbing dolefully, as she always did when scolded. Mr. Bishop looked down upon the weeping bundle of calico, sorely puzzled. "Did you forget your promise when you slid so many times?" he gently asked. "We never did slide so many times," said Weezy indignantly. "'Cause we promised," wailed Kirsty. "Me and Weezy was only but just heeling and towing the bank." Mr. Bishop tried hard not to smile. Indeed, was that all? But cow, Did you heel and toe it? I want to see. It's just as easy as nothing, said Weezy, frisking off to the snowdrift where she and Kisty had been playing. At sight of its steep side riddled with holes, like a cliff full of sand martins' nests, Mr. Bishop laughed outright. But he caught his breath when fearless little Weezy ran swiftly down, setting her small boot heels in these holes one after another. "That's how to heel the bank," she called back from the bottom. "Quick! Look, Mr. Cousin Bishop, this is how to untoe it." And facing about, she ran up, pressing the toes of her little boots deep into the tracks their heels had made. "What will these children do next to kill themselves?" thought the teacher. "I hate to keep breaking their hearts." But when he told them that they must not heel and toe the bank any more, Weezy only said, "Well, we didn't slide so many times, now did we, Mr. Cousin Bishop?" "And we didn't never break our promage," added Kisty, emerging from her apron. "As if we'd be little and tell-lie girls," said Weezy, as she and Kisty trudged home hand in hand behind Mr. Bishop. When she went into the sitting room, her grandpa and grandma sat by the open fire, with an empty chair between them, and both were smiling. "You'd better shut the door, dear," said Grandma quietly. Weezy turned around to obey, and then, for the first time, saw her father, who had been hiding behind it. "Oh, Papa, Papa, you funny Papa!" cried she, springing into his arms and half smothering him with kisses. "Who brought you to Grandma's house?" "Did Mama?" "No, dear, Mama couldn't come, so she sent me to take you home for the Christmas tree. She has a wonderful present for you." Oh, what is it, Papa?" "I promised I wouldn't tell, but something that moves. A tricycle." "Oh, is it a tricycle?" "Something that can make more music than a tricycle," replied Papa, with a glance at Grandma. "Is it a hand organ?" "Oh, is it?" cried Weezy, clapping her hands. No, little quiz. It's not a hand organ," laughed Mr. Rowe. "And now I shan't tell you another thing about it, or before I know it, you'll be guessing what it is." Chapter 12. A beautiful present Mr. Rowe stayed at the parsonage one day, and then went back to Gallatin, taking with him Weezy and Kisty. Kisty's brother Ned met her at the station and drove her away in the dog-cart, and Weezy went home with her father in a hack. There's Kirk looking out of the window. Oh, and there's Molly. Guess they'll be glad to see their dear little sister," cried Weezy complacently as the driver stopped at the gate. "Did you tell her, Papa? Did you tell her?" shouted Kirk, dancing out in his slippers and catching up Weezy at the risk of breaking his back. No, my son, I didn't tell her," said Papa, laughing. "I remembered my promise to you and Molly. Molly was already on the threshold, hugging and kissing her dear little sister, and Mr. Rowe had to drive the excited children in before he could close the door. "Where's Mama? Where is my Mama?" cried Weezy, running into the sitting room. "Upstairs," said Molly, her blue eyes sparkling. "Papa's gone up, and we're going in a minute, just as soon as I can get your things off. Dear, I do believe your hood is tied in a hard knot. Bust the string, Sim Wood." "Oh, come ahead," cried Kirk impatiently, perching on the railing of the stairway. "In a minute. The knot's undoing." "There, now we'll scamper," said Molly, dropping the hood and taking one of Weezy's hands, while Kirk skipped down and took the other. Side by side the three children hurried upstairs into their Mamma's chamber. "Here I am, Mamma. Don't you feel delighted to have your little girl come home?" cried Weezy, frisking up to her mother, who sat in an easy-chair by the grate, in a new cardinal wrapper, holding on her lap a white flannel bundle. "Yes, dear, I am delighted. Indeed I am," said Mamma, kissing the bright, eager face again and again. "Have you been Grandma's little comfort?" "Some," replied Weezy, rather doubtfully. "Grandma says I improve." "Let me show it first, please let me show it first," whispered Kirk, fingering the white flannel bundle which his little sister had not yet observed. "You haven't asked what Mamma has for you, Weezy," said Papa, very near telling. "It's yours, and it's Molly's, and it's mine," said Kirk, turning down the blanket with a flourish. "There, sir, what do you think of that? It's a little live brother, an onty-donty little brother." Oh, gasped Weezy, hopping up and down and gazing at the awakening little stranger. "Truly, Mamma, Is he ours to keep? We trust so, dear. Oh, Mama, just see his little fists wiggle. And, Mama, look. He's got his eyes open already. Kirsty ran over early the next morning to see the baby, and when she and Weezy became too noisy, Mrs. Rose sent them into Molly's room, where, to tell the truth, they were not wanted. Molly sprang up and hid her work in a drawer, for she was doing something that her little sister must not know of at present, something that would please her vastly by and by. To begin at the beginning, Mrs. Rowe had said one day that at Christmas she should give Viola Maud to Weezy, whereupon Mr. Rowe had remarked that, if she did so, he should give Weezy a new gentleman doll in place of Sambo, who had now grown old and decrepit. Then it was that it came into Molly's head to marry these dolls to each other, and make them a fine wedding. She and Kirk had talked about it a great deal during Weezy's absence, and made all the arrangements. Kirk, with his toy press, was to print the wedding cards. Lavisa had promised to make the wedding cake, and Molly herself was to provide the bride's trousseau, which must be as elegant and ample as Viola Maud herself could desire. It was nearly completed, and Molly was setting the last stitches in the bridal veil this morning, when interrupted by Weezy and Kirsty. The little girls were discussing the new baby with great animation. "What do you suppose makes him cry so funny?" exclaimed Kirsty, inclined to be jealous of his young lordship. "Oh, he hasn't learned how," cried Weezy, warm in his defence. "Course he can't cry nice yet. He hasn't been down here only but just 2 weeks." "Oh, so he hasn't. I forgot," said Kirsty meekly. "Before he came down he used to be a little angel fluttering round the sky," added Weezy instructively. "And you know, he didn't hear anybody crying up there." This must be so, and seemed to settle the matter, and no more fault could be found with his manner of crying. "Who cut off his wings?" queried matter-of-fact Kirsty, sniffing Molly's cologne. "Was it your mamma?" "Oh, no. Guess they dropped off." "He's got awful little feet," remarked Kirsty, putting the stopper back into the cologne bottle. "Awful little," echoed Weezy. "And so soft and pinky." Don't think baby's nose is very pretty," said Kirsty frankly. "I don't care. It's pretty'n yours is, any old how, Kirsty nigh," retorted Weezy, backing away from the bureau where Kirsty stood. "Visa calls it a Roman nose," said Molly, with a grown-up smile, very irritating to her small sister. "Well, I don't care if it is a roaming nose. It's just as good as anybody's." "Yes, indeed, dear," said Molly soothingly. "And Mamma says it won't look so big when baby gets plumper. And now, if you and Kirsty will run down and play in the dining room, I'll give each of you a piece of candy out of the box Grandma sent me." "Well," said Weezy, again in good humour, "if you won't give us the tongue-smarty kind, we'll go." Chapter 13. The Doll's Christmas Wedding. On Christmas Eve, Mrs. Rowe came downstairs to see the Christmas tree that Aunt Clara had arranged, and, to please Weezy, Nurse brought the baby. It must be admitted that the little fellow behaved abominably, making up faces at everybody, and even squaring his fists at the lovely silver mug presented to him, as if he scorned the name of Donald Rowe that Santa Claus had engraved upon it. But then, as Weezy justly remarked, baby was not used to company. Everybody else fully enjoyed the wonderful tree, laden with gifts. There was a dark merino for Ellen Nolan, an overcoat for Jimmy Maguire, and a great package of books for the minister, Mr. Cutler. There was a nice workbox for Lavisa, a warm red shawl for Pocahontas, and a lovely picture book for Kirsty, beside gifts without number for the Wymans and Rose. But what captivated Weezy more than all these things was the sight of 2 dolls sitting under the tree side by side. One was Viola Maud, gorgeously arrayed in a party dress of pink satin, and the other was an elegant little bachelor in a black broadcloth suit, with white waistcoat and gloves, and a watch no bigger than a buttercup. "Oh, the beautiful dollies," cried she, dropping on her knees before them. "Oh, Molly, do, you 'spect they're for me?" Yes, every bit of 'em," replied Molly, almost as excited as Weezy. "And here are Viola Maud's clothes. Mamma cut 'em out, and I sewed 'em, all but the buttonholes." "Oh, you a darling sister. Oh, what a beautiful little trunk. Kirk bought you that. Doesn't it look for all the world like Aunt Clara's big Saratoga?" Weezy pulled out the garments, one by one, uttering little squeals of delight, and hopping up every other moment to kiss Kirk and Molly. The trunk contained 6 complete suits, not counting the red jersey jacket, and by changing about, putting the polonaise of one dress over the skirt of another, Viola Maud, you see, could have 2 different gowns for each day in the week. Then there were half a dozen hats of the latest mode, and handkerchiefs of real lace, beside 2 sets of undergarments all ruffled and tucked. Certainly it was a fine outfit for a little girl of 11 to fashion, and Molly deserved much credit. Before the presents were taken from the tree, Kirsty was brought over to see it, and Kirk and Molly told her and Weezy all about the marvellous doll wedding to be celebrated on the morrow, and how Kirk was going round early in the morning to invite the wedding guests. "He'll bring me a card too," thought Kirsty, delighted, and I never had a wedding card in all my life. Christmas dawned clear and bright, and after breakfast Kirk and Molly bustled off to one corner of the library with an air of great importance. "Are you sure you've printed invitations enough?" asked Molly anxiously. "Oh, yes, here they are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, said Kirk, counting over the cream-tinted correspondence cards in his hand. They were dainty affairs, and read in this way: "A Miss Weezy Rowe requests the pleasure of your presence at the marriage of her doll, Viola Maud, to Mr. Clarence Osborne, on Christmas, at 3:00 p.m., 6 Oak Street, P.S. Please bring all your dolls." Molly had hesitated about the postscript, but had finally concluded it would be safer to add it. While she was trying her pen, Kirk slipped the 7 cream-tinted cards into their 7 cream-tinted envelopes, each bearing the monogram R.O., which of course meant Rowe and Osborne. Then Molly carefully addressed these envelopes to the 7 little girls that Weezy knew best, and laid them in a pretty willow basket, with a white satin bow on top. When they were ready, Kirk took the basket and went out to deliver them. From her mother's room, Kirsty Nye saw him coming down the street, and her heart went pitter-pat. But alack and alas, Kirk walked straight by, and never turned his head. He left an invitation for Jenny Lancy right opposite, and one for Mattie Lee at the corner, and after that he came back by the house to leave one on Elm Street for that snip of a Dolly Wright, whom Weezy hardly knew at all. Kirsty had been so sure she herself should be invited. And why not? Oh, it was very, very hard. No wonder she nearly cried her eyes out, and at dinner left her pudding untasted, feeling that this was a very cruel world for a little girl only 6 years old. 2:45 came at last, and as Molly remarked, it was almost late enough to begin the wedding. She and Kirk had got all the old dolls together in a row on the sitting-room lounge to represent Viola Maud's poor relations, when Jenny Lancy rushed in, exclaiming, "Oh, Molly, did you mean to leave out Kirsty Nye? She feels dreadfully because she isn't invited." "I did invite her. I invited Kirsty Nye first of any," cried Molly, flying across the room in wild excitement. "Kirk Rowe, you've gone and forgotten to give Kirsty her invitation. You naughty, horrid boy. I think you're just as—" Molly bit her lips, trembling with anger, and began to cry. "Oh, dear, dear," sobbed she, in quite a different tone. "You've made me lose my temper again. Oh, Kirk, how could you, when I promised Mamma I'd try to be sweet for baby's sake?" "I delivered every note there was in the basket, so now," said Kirk sulkily. "Who came to the door at Mr. Nye's? Was it the girl?" "I don't know, I don't believe I went there," said Kirk, considering. "I'll go and see." Wait, said Jenny. "Take Kirsty a card, can't you? She'll be mad not to have one like the rest of us." "I didn't print but 7, said Kirk. "Well, I'll write her one. She won't know the difference," returned Molly, running into the library and dragging out her desk. As she lifted the lid, the first thing she saw was a cream-tinted envelope, so plainly directed to Kirsty Nye that Grandma herself might have read it without her spectacles. "There, miss, who's to blame now?" cried Kirk triumphantly, peeping into the envelope to make sure the card was in it. The next moment the front door slammed, and he was racing down the street bareheaded, to bring Kirsty, for, dearly as he loved to tease, he could not bear to have anybody made unhappy. You may be sure Mrs. Nye was not long in putting on her little daughter's hood and cloak, and the rest of the wedding guests had hardly assembled before Kirk and Kirsty appeared among them, Kirsty's happy face beaming with smiles. There was a hush in the room when the doll bride and bridegroom, supported by Molly, entered arm in arm and took the places in the bay window, beneath a marriage bell of Christmas evergreen. The bride wore a white satin gown with a most extravagant train, and her long lace veil was fastened with a wreath of fine white flowers, supposed to be dwarf orange blossoms. She stood gazing straight at the minister, while the bridegroom leaned toward her with an affectionate stare, his left hand grasping a cambric handkerchief with which to dry her eyes in case she should shed tears during the trying ceremony. Kirk, in his father's best white necktie, officiated as clergyman, and as Viola Maud could only say Papa and Mama, and as Clarence Osborne was too much stuffed to speak at all, Molly had to make the responses for both parties. "Do you, Clarence Osborne, take this woman to be your awful wedded wife?" began the acting minister in a tone of deep solemnity. "I do," squeaked a faint voice, while the bridegroom bowed with all his might. "Do you, Viola Maud, take this man to be your awful wedded husband?" "I do," answered a voice still fainter, and the bride's head bent gently, like a flower caressed by a butterfly. "Then," said the minister, clearing his throat, "I pronounce you man and wife." The nervous strain was over at last, but it had been too much for the sensitive bride. As the bridegroom turned to salute her, she tottered and fell fainting into his arms. Fortunately, Molly, foreseeing such a catastrophe, had provided herself with a smelling bottle, which she now held to the nostrils of the swooning little lady. Mrs. Osborne was kind enough to revive very soon, and to receive the congratulations of the guests crowding about her, and it was observed, in her praise, that she greeted her poor relations just as cordially as she did the most richly attired doll in the room. Afterwards Weezy and Kirsty passed around the wedding cake and the bride's cake, and Molly and Kirk brought in hot chocolate in pretty little china cups, that all might drink to the health of the bride and bridegroom. Oh, it was a lovely, lovely afternoon. And its close was better than its beginning, for the little girls and their dolls were taken home in Dr. Wyman's great double sleigh, in which Mr. and Mrs. Osborne had set out on their honeymoon trip, and so ended the dolls' Christmas wedding. Thank you for joining us in the world of Little Miss Weezy, where warmth, tenderness, and the spirit of childhood shine through every page. Penn Shirley's endearing story reminds us of the importance of empathy, family, and the beautiful strength found in youthful wonder. As Weezy's gentle influence touched those around her, may her story continue to inspire kindness and imagination in your own life. If you enjoyed this reading, don't forget to subscribe for more timeless tales here on Storytime Haven. Until next time, keep the spirit of stories alive in your heart.